Black Adam. This is the latest in the DCEU. It follows this character called Black Adam, who I guess is an anti-hero who is just driven by rage. And he finally makes an appearance on Earth again after 5,000 years of hiding. He's played by The Rock, and apparently this is a film that has been 15 years in the making. And it certainly seems that way because this seems like a superhero film that would have come out 15 years ago. This was an entirely predictable comic book movie that had every cliche element of every MCU and DCEU film, but having no character and no unique personality of its own. I thought this was a disappointing, unimaginative, lackluster movie that did nothing to excite or entertain me. It introduces itself with about 5 minutes of exposition, narrative, dialogue, whatever, and I think that's one of the worst ways you can start a movie. It just isn't gripping. I always think it's better to show something and not spoon feed us, but I don't know what that's to do with. Maybe that's a budget thing, or they just didn't have enough screen time to show it. But I think showing something is always better than just throwing exposition at us, because it's a very quick and easy way to lose interest. It also had a poor lineup of characters. I thought they could have done so much better with The Rock here. Obviously, The Rock isn't famed for making great movies, but I think he's a man that is talented. And I think this film was an opportunity for him to really show his acting capabilities, and they never gave him that opportunity here. And I thought a lot of the supporting characters, such as the Justice Society, were lackluster as well. The Justice Society, I guess, are just the B-Tech Justice League. Pierce Brosnan was the standout as Dr. Fate in his limited screen time. Hawkman was decent too, but Cyclone was dull and Atom Smasher was god-awful. And the problem with these characters, and it's not a fault of the characters because it's just a fault in general with all these superheroes that we have in different franchises, these just felt like DC versions of characters I've already seen in Marvel, essentially. Like Atom Smasher seemed like Ant-Man. Dr. Fate seemed like Doctor Strange. Hawkman felt like Falcon. You know, it felt very, very similar. But it's not maybe a fair criticism of the movie and its characters, because these characters could have come out before the Marvel versions of them. But regardless, they just didn't make for interesting characters, I don't think. There's also this lady and her son, which feature far too much in this film, that I found incredibly annoying. The son, I've never wanted a child to die more in a movie. I know how that sounds, but I really wanted him to die. And whenever it seemed like he was going to die, and there were several opportunities for people to kill him, he was just saved in time. Perfect timing. I'm almost at a loss about what to complain about this movie here, because I'm just kind of shocked that how many things were bad in this movie. One of the worst things was the humor. I don't think a single joke landed in this film. I went to see this movie with Joe, and I think the only times we laughed were when we were laughing at how laughably bad something in the movie was, such as a very predictable line of dialogue or a very cringy moment. There was plenty of those, and those were the only times that we even let out a chuckle. Sometimes you can let things like that slide when the rest of the movie is good, but ultimately this was a film just filled with bad, rushed, cringy, predictable writing, surrounded by badly timed, shitty humour, and then a ton of CGI. But when I see that the movie is written by 3 different people in the credits, that explains a lot. Whenever you see a movie, especially a superhero comic book movie, has been written by 3 people, you know it's going to be a shambles. You know it's not going to line up very well, and that's exactly the case here. This was a very disappointing outing, even for DCEU standards. They're not exactly famed for making good movies. But I expected a good popcorn movie at least, but after an hour, I was already checking my watch, which is never a good sign. You know, I was even asking Joe, do you know how long this movie is? Because I was really fearful that it was going to be like a 2-hour 30 movie. Luckily it was. It was like an hour 45, an hour 50. So that helped, because this film felt longer than that. Joe told me that he actually fell asleep during this movie. I didn't even notice, but he fell asleep, he said, for about 15 minutes, and he wasn't even tired. The movie was just that dull for him. I didn't fall asleep, but I can understand why he did. I was really struggling to stay invested in this movie. And honestly, this film once again has proved that only 2 people should be making movies in the DCEU, and that is Zack Snyder and James Gunn. James Gunn is great at the funny side of it. He's good at making those more light-hearted and fun DCEU movies, whereas Zack Snyder has been very good at making the darker DCEU movies. So I think those are the only two that should be making these films. I could list a few things about how this movie could improve, such as getting us to empathize with the character early on. That would have been a massive help to understand why Black Adam is who he is. Because for the most part, he just seems like an angry version of Superman, and that's what you get for like an hour 20 before you finally understand and get told about his backstory, which is more exposition, so that wasn't great, but he's just this guy causing chaos, and it's like, how are we meant to root for this character when he's doing all this shit and we don't even know why? I don't really want to go too much into spoilers, but if you've seen the trailer, you know that he's full of revenge because his wife and son are dead, and I think that would have been a great way to start the movie, as bad as that sounds, but I think it would have been an intense way if he'd started off showing that in some way, like an intense, like 5-minute segment, rather than all this fucking dialogue and narration they did at the start. Show something intense like that, so we understand what is driving Black Adam to be who he is, why he's filled with rage, and then the story could then be about him sort of turning a corner and not using his rage for bad, but actually using it to be a protector. This movie felt out of order at times. It felt messy, it felt like it didn't have a real end goal, and the so-called villain was a typical hollow CGI character. It was laughable. It was entirely predictable. We've seen that a million times in a million other comic book movies where you just get some CG guy spawn in the last 20 minutes and you know exactly how the fight's going to go. The hero's going to struggle initially, but then he'll overcome it with some extreme power and win and save the day. I'm surprised a comic book movie this cliche is still being made. I know it's 15 years in the making, but you think they would have updated things so that it didn't make the same mistakes that other superhero movies have made in the past. But it seems they're happy to settle for mediocrity, which is exactly what this movie was. I would give Black Adam a 4 out of 10. I would never rewatch this. If you've seen it, let me know what you think about it. I know some people seem to like this movie, but I didn't. I thought it was very poor. And hopefully the DCEU can do better from here, because this was about as low as it gets. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.